Okay, well, I'm glad you had a chance to hear from Rocky a little bit this morning, and now you're going to really get to hear the real deal. I gave you a little bit of an appetizer last night of my experience growing up and a little bit of a kind of a 30,000-foot view of our relationship and what happened. And, you know, it's really one thing when I'm speaking somewhere, I'm sharing with groups, and I'm doing it by myself, and I can say anything I want, and who's going to know the difference? But when she's sitting right there in the front row, I know I've got to speak the truth, because now she's going to stand up here and she's going to tell you what it was really like. And we're going to unpack a little bit of our story. When I was growing up, I loved to take things apart. I like to fix things. I had an erector set, and any of you kids out there old enough to remember erector sets with the nuts and bolts and screws, and you built things. And, you know, I would just sit in my room and I would build stuff, and I thought it was so much fun. But when something is broken, you really can't repair it unless you know how it's supposed to work in the first place, right? Well, I carried this fascination with disassembling things and doing my best to repair them mechanically up into my adult life. And it was a few years ago, my laptop stopped working, and I realized that it had the cooling fan, the CPU cooling fan, and I don't want to get too technical because that's about the extent of what I know. But I looked online and I saw, you know, that's only like a $15 part, and I can buy the replacement part and just replace the cooling fan and not have to buy a new laptop. So I proceeded to take my laptop apart. There are 384 little tiny screws the size of a jeweler's watch screw inside a laptop. And so I took them all out and took it apart, and I got the cooling fan out.
Biggest mess you ever saw.
It looked like I'd set a grenade under my laptop. And I had it all laid out, and so I got the cooling fan ordered, and it was delivered, and I screwed it in, and I plugged it in, and I put the whole thing back together, and I had about 12 screws left over. And I thought, well, I'm not sure how important those can be, because it's together. I hit the on switch, nothing, just completely dead. So at that point, it went into the trash. I decided, you know, I just can't fix everything as much as I would desire. So when we share this information, our aim is to really be as transparent as we can about our own failures, to share our journey with you. We don't think we're all that special. We don't think our story is all that unique. We're not going to share something with you that's entirely original either, because what we're going to share with you has come from years and years of research that we just began to learn later in life in our journey. But we've just taken some time to really learn about ourselves and about each other, and how to find out what it takes to enter into this repair journey once you realize what's broken. If we all naturally, just by nature, knew how to love people well, this information would be unnecessary. But I'm sure that all of us would agree that it's a little more challenging. It's a little more challenging to navigate relationships than we originally anticipated if you're married, on your wedding day, when, like Tina says, you walk down this aisle as hundreds of people do every day throughout North America and throughout the world. It's a little more difficult when you get down the road and you actually get into it. We had dinner at a Chinese restaurant down in Orange County, P.F. Chang's. I don't know if you have Chang's up here or not, but P.F. Chang's had this billboard out in front of the restaurant, and it said, "Marriage is like eating with chopsticks. It looks really easy until you try it." Thought that was great. So every marriage has these nagging problems. Many people think their relationship is difficult because they married the wrong person. They often go through the relationship thinking, if my spouse would only change. If they would change and be different, things would be different for us, and that would be good. But the fact is that many people are on their second and third marriage, which goes on to prove that no marriage is tension-free. And for many people, their marriage seems to run fairly smoothly, and any relationship seems to run fairly smoothly until the difficulties arise. So we look at our marriage as we're tubes of toothpaste. We enter into this, and each of us is a big tube of toothpaste, and what marriage does is it squeezes the tube. And what comes out? Toothpaste. Whatever's inside us starts to come out in the marriage relationship, and marriage squeezes us to the point where what is in us is revealed. And it's revealed in a relationship that all of a sudden puts a spotlight on yourself. A friend of mine told me once, a friend of mine who's a marriage and family therapist, he said, you know, when you get married, it's like you married a full-length mirror. So take a look. And he was right.
Yeah, when Tina was talking about the dance around the rocks, we really mean that. We tried to dance, but every time we hit one of those rocks, a grenade would go off and the conversation would be over. So there was a pattern to our relationship, and that's why we had the same argument over and over and over again. What we're going to do in a brief moment here is all written in a book called How We Love, and there's many books on this topic that we're going to talk about today, but this particular one is really easy to read. It takes all the content of what we're going to share today and makes it really accessible and really easy. There's also a website called howwelove.com that you can go on and take the test, and it'll give you some more understanding of what we're talking about. Nobody's cookie cutter. God created us all uniquely, but we do fall into some really predictable patterns. We've been working with couples for the last 10 years, and when these couples fall into these patterns that we're going to tell you about, they say the same verbiage, they say the same complaints. It's really consistent. But we are a combination of our personality, our birth order, what we heard, saw, and experienced growing up, and these damaged love styles that we're going to tell you about right now. So we had a damaged dance that we did with one another, and so it required that both of us heal of those damages, but in different ways. So everybody's journey is unique, and God's going to take you on that journey specific to your experiences, but the patterns are real consistent. And so we usually, on average, have people come up to us after we speak and say, that's us. That's how we are. That's because our pattern is so common. There are other combinations that we'll tell you about too, but if you don't get it all today, that's okay. This is just a teaser for you to explore more and find out more about it. Maya Lynn and Kay, who wrote the book, How We Love, they're both believers, and they believe the book really should have been called How We Don't Love, but the publishers didn't like that idea. It doesn't sound very positive.
Or I Love Sex and Money.
Yeah, or I Love Sex and Money. But there is an example in Scripture of what someone who is secure in their relationship with God and secure in their other relationship, what that love looks like. So what we're going to be talking about today is just the ones that fall short of that or below the line, as Tina talked about.
You probably remember at some point in junior high science class where they talked about your adrenal system, your endocrine system, and what happens when you get into an emergency situation. There's a reaction, a physical, biological reaction that takes place in us. You remember what happens when you find yourself in a crisis or an emergency situation? Yeah, these reactions are fight, flight, or what? Freeze.
Freeze, good.
Some of you paid more attention than I did in science class. These basically are what they called stress reactions. Stress reactions take place physically in our bodies, but what we're going to talk about is how they also take place emotionally and relationally. These same emotional stress reactions take place in relationships. Some of us are fighters, some of us flee, and some of us freeze. We kind of get caught in the middle. Now, just off the top of your head, what you know about yourself, just raise your hand. If you think you're a fighter, if you say, something comes up in a relationship or you have a problem with somebody or an issue in your marriage, or if you're not married, in a relationship at work, say, this is an issue, it's going to come up, we need to talk about this. You'd be the one to say, hey, we need to talk. Raise your hand if you say, you step into it. Okay, how many of you would say, when that situation takes place, your response is, we do need to talk about that, but later. We'll get around to that. We'll talk about that later. Or if we don't ever have to talk about this at some point, I'm pretty good with that too. We can. Later's always good. How many of you feel like you? What's that? Yeah. How about freeze? You find yourself, sometimes you get paralyzed. You don't know which way to go. Yeah, we find fewer in that category, but we're going to unpack it, and those of you who are freezers might begin to see yourselves a little better and be more honest. Well, I'm going to talk about, we gave you a handout, and this is where we're going to look at some of the things in the handout that had those columns in it that talks about these love styles, and we're going to begin to unpack that, because what really began to help me in our journey is when I began to understand that this is not my personality, this is not my nature that I was born with, this is not who I am as a man, but it's an adaptive love style that I've learned growing up from what I saw, heard, and experienced in my family. the emotional absence of my father. Survival techniques in my family were to stay off the radar, don't acknowledge intense emotions. Intense emotions can be scary and dangerous. Nobody pursues me, so I don't know how to pursue others. Little boy in a family with a dad that was emotionally absent. I didn't learn about emotional connection with women. A lot of things about masculinity that I didn't learn as a young man, at least not from him. So I learned it from my other 12-year-old friends. You know how that goes. So I fell into this category of flight. So when things would get difficult between us, as they were getting at that point in our relationship, my fallback behavior was to isolate. Intense emotions from her were scary for me. I didn't know how to deal with them. I would avoid. I would move away from her rather than moving towards her. And so you'll see I'm in that column on the handout that we gave you that would be called an avoider. Like I said, it's not my temperament, it's not my personality, it's not how I was born. It's an adaptive style, it's a damaged love style that I learned. We learned these things growing up, and we can learn our way out of them. So that's what we're hoping to share with you. How do I learn my way out of these behaviors that seemed to be functional and had a purpose at one point, but now they're damaging the relationships that I'm in? So let me talk about the avoider pattern a little bit more. I talked about how we floundered for the first 25 years, how we hurt each other. We had the same dance, the same arguments over and over again. We saw probably 9 counselors during our journey. We lost hope, basically. We saw that we had unhealthy patterns, but we didn't know what to do about them. We didn't know really what was broken. And if we had known this before, it would have saved us years of pain. The avoider has some main beliefs, and you can see some of those listed on your handout. And my main beliefs were don't want, don't need, don't have any needs, because that way I can't be hurt or disappointed. It's not safe to feel or need, and so I learned to be hyper-independent. I became hyper-vigilant. I wanted other people to value being perfect like I did, and I wanted other people to value independence the way I did. And so if everybody else around me took care of themselves, I was comfortable, and my anxiety was lowered, because I didn't have to have the responsibility of caring for their anxiety or their failures or their imperfections. I avoided a vulnerability. I avoided strong emotions. But in that whole process, we do end up hurting each other. And avoiders hurt each other in a number of ways. First of all, I was hurting her by being unresponsive. I would stonewall when she had a need, or she had a need for emotional connection.
Or minimize.
Or I would minimize. Right. When she would have some strong emotions, I would minimize, and I say, hey, not so fast. Now, settle down.
Simmer down now.
My watchword on everything when things got out of hand is, hey, let's all just simmer down now, you know.
Simmer down.
So I put too much value on tasks, and my way of showing love was to do things for people. So the way I would approach her to show love for her and to try to enter back in with her would be to do tasks for her, because I felt tasks would be appreciated and loved, and I would show that I valued the relationship. So when other people, the interesting thing is when other people around me would appear too needy, or people would appear to want something from me or ask too much from me, that would be unreasonable, and that would make me anxious, and I would withdraw from them. Now, there's a scale on all of this. You can be an extreme avoider, you can be a mild avoider, and it really can have to do with your introversion versus extroversion scale. There are introverted avoiders that really withdraw a lot and isolate a lot. That's where they find their comfort. That's their go-to zone. There are extroverted avoiders. And I was more on the, probably more to the right side of center on introversion, extroversion. Because when I was at work, when I was around other people and friends, they probably didn't categorize me as an avoidant type of person. I was socially active, I had lots of friends, I would be in leadership positions, I was influential in companies and businesses, and I could lead there. So if you're confused about where you are when we go through this, think about what describes you best in your current, most primary relationship. Your current, most primary relationship, what looks like you. And for me, in this relationship, I was an avoider. So what are the growth steps for an avoider? Well, we all have to grow in our patterns, and for an avoider, the way I needed to grow was I needed to stop relying on that withdrawal and isolation as a tool or as a technique to get what I wanted, or to shut down other people's emotions, or to calm the situation. I have to learn to be comfortable with and managing difficult emotions of my own as well as hers, and without moving away or shutting down. And the biggest thing for me was to give language to feelings. I did not have language to express the feelings or emotions that I was having. And I married someone who understood the encyclopedia of feelings. For me, my encyclopedia of feelings was about this thick. I think I knew frustrated, I knew restless, I knew hungry and tired, which are really not feelings, those are states of being. And it was very limited. And
Happy.
And I knew somewhat happy.
You'd say that was enjoyable.
I knew enjoyable.
Enjoyable.
Yes.
He
Pleasant.
liked the word enjoyable.
Pleasant. And we were with some friends not too long ago, and they said, yeah, Rob, it's kind of like you were pleasant but bland. I go, and you meant that as a compliment, right? And
Pleasant plan.
so what happens is when we begin to identify our style and our pattern, what's really interesting is how we find somebody that seems to be a lot opposite from us. And the reason we share our story and our dynamic is that we find that as we share this with people, that we represent about 75% of the combinations out there that find each other. So that's why we share our story. And it's not gender-based, because we find female avoiders as many as male avoiders and the other styles. So it's not gender-based. We find that they flip-flop quite a bit. But here's who I married.
Okay, so as you said, I'm more in the fight category, and part of that is because you heard my history. I saw a lot of fighting growing up. My dad's Armenian, my mother's Hispanic, and so even if there wasn't any dysfunction, they would have been loud. I mean, it just was. I mean, culturally. So I did see connection. When my mother was sober, she was warm, she was affectionate, but when she was drunk, it was just the opposite. It was really scary. So I understood what connection was, but it came and went. I could never predict if it was going to be there or not. So that's why I didn't want to get married, because I was so afraid that people would leave. Also, this is not something I remember, but when I was 18 months old, my mother developed tuberculosis, and she was sent away for a year to a sanitarium, they called them then, and I also contracted it from her, so I was put in a hospital in isolation at that age. And so I think my baby brain just computed, people leave. You're going to be left. You're going to be left alone. I never would have labeled it abandonment because I wasn't really abandoned. I had caretakers. We had housekeepers that took care of me after I got out of the hospital. So I minimized it for many years, the effect that it had. But it did come back to haunt in this relationship. So I was looking for intense connection I could feel and that would stay. I didn't want to marry someone that would leave because both my parents married 4 times. So I kind of fell into this fight category over here, and on your columns, it's called a vacillator. It's a long word that just means that you swing back and forth. You vacillate back and forth between being really excited about someone and then swinging all the way out to, I don't like you anymore. And someone can swing a lot, or they can swing a little. And I don't know where I was on that scale, but in this primary relationship, I definitely swung in and out. And so what I was looking for was intense connection, and sometimes vacillators will confuse intensity for intimacy. It's not the same, it's just intense. So sometimes a vacillator will date frequently different people and then break up and then find somebody else and be madly in love, and then they'll break up and they'll find somebody else. And some people will marry that way too. So I was looking for something that would be consistent. So as you can imagine, why do you think I would be attracted to a guy like Rob?
Other than the obvious.
Yes, he had it's true. He at the time he had long hair and he was a musician.
She always has to throw that in, you know.
You still would have long hair if you didn't, Jim.
I used to play for Kiss.
Yeah, right. So, I'm looking for Steady Eddie here. And now, why do you think he would be attracted to someone like me? Besides the obvious, I know. Just, yeah, it's different. It's exciting. I had a grasp of emotions. I did like fun. I could say what I was feeling. He was looking for excitement that he didn't get growing up at home, and I fit the bill. So we were both sort of like, see if you get this metaphor, we're sort of like two ticks without a dog. We're sucking the blood out of each other, and there's a limited source there. So we're trying to get from one another what we didn't get growing up, or secure from one another what we didn't get. So in terms of the vacillator, the main beliefs they have, if you fit into this category, even if you think you do, you can look into this more later, is that people leave. That's the first thing. Second is they're waiting for connection. That means that you care. And if you have to wait for it, you're not so sure they do. So they often get mad. They'll often believe either you're for me and you're into me, or you're not. There is no in between. It's one or the other. We need to be on the same page. That's something they say a lot. When you hurt me, I'm done. I'm out. I'm very lonely and sensitive. They can become very sensitive because they know emotion and connection, and when it's not there, they really notice it. And they think they're very good at reading people's minds because they're always looking to see, are you into me, are you not? They're scanning the room. So here's what we do in our relationship. Because in Rob's favor, he was very steady. He was a hard worker. He was, steady in the sense that he provided, protected. But, the kids and I said his emotional quotient was like a ½ inch on his forehead. This is very, very happy, and this is very, very mad.
That's pretty much what my kids saw growing up. This is
Isn't
way
that
to
true,
go.
Michelle?
Great job. Good job. I am so
That was
mad
it.
at you.
That was it.
It's like,
That's all you got. That's all you got. So
those are intense ranges for me.
So the very thing I was attracted to him initially, what do you think came to be the separation between us at the year 25 mark? The very same things. I wanted the steadiness, but I wanted some emotional connection, and he couldn't give it. So here's what we do.
And so what do you think got in the way between us from my perspective when her emotional neediness, from my perspective, got pretty high, and she was wanting something from me that I felt inadequate to provide? What do you think got in the way between us? That very same thing. Her emotions and her intensity, the thing that attracted me to her in the first place, started to get in the way.
Yeah,
So this was our dance, though.
Yeah. So I would sense that he was kind of pulling away from me either by work, or he became a marathon runner, I believe, to specifically run away from me.
26 miles at a time.
So he'd get preoccupied with a lot of stuff, and I would start to feel that emptiness inside, or maybe even that little girl fear that, okay, he's leaving. I'm not sure how to protect myself. I started putting walls up around my heart. So I would approach him and say, hey, we haven't talked in a while. You seem like really preoccupied. Is there any chance that, are you willing to even look me in the eye? I mean, there's some things that I really want out of life, and you're not even listening to me. Would you just hear me? That's
This
all
encyclopedia
I really want.
is now getting down into K, L, M, N, O, P. My encyclopedia stopped at A, and I'm thinking, this is demanding something of me that I don't have, and I'm starting to feel overwhelmed by this. I say, yeah, we do need to talk. I know we do, and I'll come back to you. I was a workaholic, too. That was my addiction. I fell into non-relational forms of intimacy, which avoiders often find, which would be like pornography or drugs or other types of addictions. Mine was work. So I fell into work, and work became my lover. And so that pulled me away from her. But this distance, I'm a pretty bright guy, and I began to see as this distance got greater, it got my attention. So I'd come back, and I would be charming enough to tell her, okay, look, I won't do that anymore. I know you need some attention, and I'll pay attention to you. And trust me, we can do this. We can do this. I'll be here for you. And I would convince her, and she'd come back. But she'd keep coming back, and she'd keep coming this direction. And I hadn't taken care of what's going on in me to handle this. And so all of a sudden I'm starting to feel a little overwhelmed. And it's like, I can't do this, and I don't have what it takes. And so she would turn again. Then I would become uncomfortable with this distance, and I'd come back, and I'd say, okay, this is not right either. We need to fix this. We did this dance year after year after year after year. And every relationship has a pursuer and a distancer. There's a pursuer and a distancer. And you will swap roles sometimes. Sometimes you'll be the pursuer, and sometimes you might be the distancer. I don't know if you remember the video game Pac-Man, but we did the Pac-Man. It was like, and then we'd switch and do this way, and then we'd go this way. Never catching each other, never meeting, never stopping, just doing the dance back and forth. Do any of you resonate with that dance?
Yeah. Okay, now, I thought during all that time he was avoiding me, and he was. But part of it was I didn't know how to communicate my emotions without that intensity, and he didn't know how to handle emotions at all. So both of us needed to know how to change, how to recognize, how to reveal what was in there, and then start changing our perspective on it. So the fighters in the room, or the vacillators here, need to learn not to idealize things so highly on the front end, and then when you're disappointed, devalue, meaning, oh, I got to the point with Rob where I reached contempt because I thought he was rejecting me. And he was, but he was really rejecting the part in him that doesn't know how to deal with it. It's like a dog chasing a bumper of a car. What's he going to do when he catches it? I mean, so he wanted it, but he didn't know what to do with it when he got it. And I didn't know how to communicate that insecurity in me that I was going to be left without anger or without frustration.
And you didn't know how to manage what it was like to be caught and then let go again. To be
Right.
caught and then let go again.
Yeah. And so that's distressing. So the three phases that most vacillators will go through in their relationship, the first phase is protest. They will protest like I did, like, hey, what's up? Can you look me in the eye? And, you seem to be working a lot lately. So the first stage is protest. It could be angry. It could be pleading. The second phase is distress. Like you're a little angrier, you're raising the white flag, you might even throw up the divorce word. And then the third stage is detach. And you just say, well, I give up, I'm done, I'm out. And I was at that stage. And it's a very dangerous stage for any couple to be in because to come back from detached is really hard. So I had to own a portion of that detachment had nothing to do with Rob. A portion of it had to do with my history and my rocks growing up that I had never dealt with. Even though we had both known the Lord at that point for 25 years. So it wasn't like we didn't have the head knowledge, but we weren't applying it to the wounds that were in us. We were using it just as head knowledge, not as emotionally, how do we be there for one another. So in a sense, I had to come down in my reactivity and in my insecurity that he was going to leave me, and he had to come up in his ability to hear and listen and communicate with feelings. So we both had a journey to do, but it was opposite.
Now there's another style. It's on your sheet too, you'll see. And this one is a cousin to the avoider. They're closely related. They have some very similar characteristics that you'll see. And this one's called the pleaser. Pleasers are often considered good news junkies. When you ask a pleaser how they're doing, they'll pull a thermometer out of their pocket and put it under your tongue. Because that's how I'm doing, is how you doing. How many of you know anybody like that? Is everybody okay? Anybody need a cup of coffee? Can I get something for you? I want to make sure everybody's okay around me. And if everything's okay around me, then I'm pretty good. I feel good about myself. They can seem to be very caretaking, and pleasing seems like a very noble way to behave. However, who is the pleaser really trying to take care of? Themselves. When people around me are distressed or dysregulated or not getting their needs met, I feel an obligation to help meet their needs. I'm anxious. So I need to resolve my anxiety by caring for others. And that's an exhausting way to live. Pleasers will walk this tightrope of performance, of performing to keep other people happy, keep other people satisfied. Because if I run the risk of you not accepting me and not being satisfied with my efforts that I'm making, then I feel like I'm being rejected and I'm being dismissed. That's the part that's too painful for me to accept. So to avoid those feelings, I walk this tightrope, which becomes an exhausting way to live.
And that was he kind of had some pleaser features. You know, he mostly avoided, but he was really pretty nice about how he avoided. He didn't smile all the time. You know, you would kind of give me the annoyed look. But you were generally trying to please me. You just could never quite get it right. And the problem with the vacillator is we're never quite satisfied with anything. You know, so he could never quite get it right because my expectations were way too high, so I had to bring those down.
And the message that I would get from her when things were going sideways with us, which was really confusing to me, being an avoider with a pleaser cousin inside me, was she would say, "Come here, I need you, go away, no, stay, go, I hate you, I love you, I need you, I want you, stay, here, go, no, come," you know. I'm trying to navigate this. Which is it? Which is it?
I didn't actually say those words, but yeah.
That was how I was decoding it, you know, in my brain. So the main beliefs of the pleaser are do nice things for other people, manage my own anxiety by being pleasing around others, don't make people mad, because if people get mad at you, then that risks rejection. And the problem that the pleaser has, the challenge that the pleaser has, is honesty. The pleasers will lie if necessary. And it's often necessary. And that's just to avoid conflict or to avoid somebody being unhappy with them. And so they have a problem telling the truth. They have a hard time being completely honest. And you ask a pleaser how they're doing, and they say, "Fine. I'm fine. I hope you're fine too." Because if we're all fine, then
Everything's fine.
everything's fine. They also have a problem with not confronting when things aren't fine. They have a problem with being indecisive. Pleasers will overreact to bad news, and negative feelings and stressful circumstances will become alarming. They just want to make it stop. And when the pleaser can't make everything okay, they get anxious and frantic, and they become very uneasy internally, but on the outside, everything seems okay. And the people around the pleasers usually don't ever sense that inner turmoil is taking place. So we all need to grow, and so how does the pleaser grow? How does the pleaser pay attention to these tendencies within them and grow through this to become more securely connected? Because like we're saying, these are damaged love styles. These are damaged love styles. And if it's based on some damage, we need to know how do we heal the damage. And there's a style that is also, we don't talk about a whole lot, but we probably should more on this. We're all pursuing something which is to be securely connected, to be securely attached, and not have these avoidant or pleasing or vacillating styles. So there is such thing as a securely connected person. We just find in most groups that we talk to, statistically, there's less than 20% of the population that would identify with the characteristics of a securely attached, securely connected person. So the pleaser grows by learning to tolerate anger, become more tolerant of other people's feelings and emotions that might go against what they're comfortable with. They need to know how to set boundaries with those difficult feelings. They need to work on honesty, being honest with themselves and others. And the pleasers need to learn to deal with their fear and anxiety because it's driving their lives so that they can stop that overreacting and that internal tension that takes place.
Yeah, so if you're operating as a believer and you have these rocks and you want to be truthful, and you know in your head that that's the right thing to do because that's what God calls us to, yet you hit one of those rocks, you're going to more likely, if you're still in this pleaser pattern, pop out with a lie because you don't want to get in trouble or you don't want to have waves. Then you beat yourself up afterwards like, why did I do that? Why did I lie? This is partly the explanation. Sin is in us. And all of us can lie, but something else is energizing it, making it harder to make the right decision. So getting in touch with these injuries will help you turn these over to the Lord and make those right decisions that you know are in Scripture. Okay, the last two categories we're going to touch on. We're not going to say a lot about them, but it's in your columns there, is the controller and the victim. And the controller is in the fight category, and the victim is in the freeze category. Now, when I say controller, don't let the word kind of put you off. All of us are controlling. That is part of the sin nature. We are all controlling. We just control in different ways. The avoider controls by avoiding. The vacillator controls by being angry. The pleaser controls by being pleasing and trying to keep everybody happy. But the controller is someone who was raised in a really troubled home, a lot of violence. Maybe they were abused. Maybe they witnessed a lot of abuse. So they came to the conclusion at a pivotal age that no one's ever going to control me ever again. Sort of like what Tina was talking about when she lived below the line. Control became her friend. So technically, she would fit in that category because I control my environment, I control people, and if they marry someone, especially a victim, they're going to control that victim in terms of where they go, who they talk to, what they wear, everything about them. Because inside them, they're very anxious, they're very scarred up, their heart's really marked up, and if I can just control everything, bad things won't happen. But that can never happen.
Based on what's happened in the controller's life in the past, they're often the person who has made a vow.
Right.
And the controllers will make vows because of some experience they've had where they say, that will never happen to me again.
Mm-hmm.
So they orchestrate their life around writing those scripts to avoid ever being in a place where those things happen to them again.
So how they hurt others is intimidation, harsh, mean words, insisting on their own way, not deferring to others, not listening to feelings, views, or opinions of others, and making excuses for their own bad behavior. So how they need to grow is they need to face that childhood pain and learn to accept comfort for the much-needed anger that they had growing up, learning less anger and less reactivity, and be able to enter in with a little calmer environment. Now, technically speaking, because my early years were so chaotic, I would have fallen into this category, except for the fact that I didn't have any control growing up, and I didn't really learn how to control others. I was just more, the original literature calls it chaotic. So the controller kid tries sometimes to fight, sometimes they flee, sometimes they please. They try everything they can to survive growing up, and that's why they're considered more chaotic. The victim, on the other hand, is usually someone who's more passive, and they just accept poor treatment. They may stay in a relationship that's really unhealthy. They don't set boundaries. They really both need a lot of help, and this category here are people that would really benefit from a kind counselor that can help bring out what those hurts and wounds are. And we see a lot of this at Lifeline. We see a lot that come through the program that are in that category. But technically speaking, I would have been too.
I hope this has been somewhat helpful to you as you begin to see and identify these love styles, these damaged love styles, because that's what they are.
I was going to ask a question,
Sure.
though. So based on just the little bit you have and the columns that you have, how many of you would think, now that you've heard all this, that you kind of know where you land? Like, how many of you would say you think you're more avoidant? Okay, they don't raise their hands when they're avoidant. Okay, and how many of you would say you think you might be more of a vacillator? You swing back and forth, in and out, in and out. Okay, and then how many of you would think you're a pleaser? And they do it with smiles on their face. Okay, and then however you think you might have been in a hard enough childhood that you might fall into the controller victim. Okay, good. So now you kind of have a lane. Again, it's not cookie cutter because you're a combination of many factors, but you kind of have a lane that you can go down and start exploring with the Lord that, hey, maybe I need to explore this. I need to look and see what are the rocks in that lane that I need to take before the Lord and start healing. The authors of the book, we know them very well, and I remember asking Kay, I said, if I had it so bad, do you think I kind of do it in layers? Like for a while, I tackled the vacillator, and then I tackled the pleaser, and then I tackled the avoider, you know. And she said, absolutely. If you had it tough, you have to kind of bring it down in layers and handle each one at a time. But at least it gives you a lane that you can go down. Now, real quick, just so you see if you were listening, what do you think would happen if two avoiders married? No, they wouldn't. No. What? Yeah, well, they might avoid marriage altogether. Yeah, but if the two avoiders married, what would it look like? Quiet what?
Quiet home. Quiet home.
Quiet home, yeah. They become roommates, absolutely. Sometimes they get a dog and all their attention goes on the dog.
He's in the garage and she's somewhere else.
Right. And they both have their projects, and actually they can get along for a real long time because they're hyper independent, they're very task oriented, they're usually dual income, no kids, and they kind of do life that way, but there's no intimacy to speak of, there's not a lot of connection. What happens when two vacillators marry? So either it's really good or it's really bad. Unless they swing at the same, and they usually don't. So, either they're just so into each other, especially in the early part of their relationship, or they're out.
The romance stage was hot, 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 hot. Makeup sex is incredible. But when they're not together, when they're vacillating in opposite ends, it's really bad.
Yeah,
and
it can be very tumultuous. Now, again, this is on a spectrum. Not everybody's the same intensity of it. And then if you had two pleasers together. Good marriage.
You remember the cartoon show Chip and Dale? The chipmunks? You go first. Oh, no, after you. What would you like to go? Where do you want to go to eat? Where would you like to eat tonight? I don't care. Where do you want to go?
Right. They can't ever decide where to go to eat because each one wants to please the other. But there's also not a lot of intimacy or connection in it. They don't want to ever rock the boat. So if something is wrong, they don't address it. So very often in these relationships, they'll stay in the relationship for a real long time, and then somebody will finally say, I can't do this anymore, and they'll go off and have an affair. They'll do something crazy. So they take it for too long because they don't address issues when they should, as they should. If their spouse asks how they're doing, they'll always say fine, instead of saying, no, I'm not so fine. I'm not sure what's wrong, but let's talk. So you can just see from just the little bit we told you that these patterns are really predictable. And if you marry these patterns up, you're going to see a certain dance. And that dance around those rocks is going to get real tricky. So what our hope is that with Christ and the Holy Spirit working through you to reveal to you what those rocks are, this just gives you some lanes to go down of really how do you sin against your partner in how you relate to one another. And we were damaging one another because we had not dealt with all the boxcars in our history.
Well, I'm going to end where we started. When something's broken, you can't fix it unless you know how it's supposed to work. And as I dug into my laptop to try to fix what I thought was broken, I actually may have replaced the part correctly. But what I didn't realize is when I got in there and put it back together that there were other things broken that I didn't even know anything about. And I didn't pay any attention to. So it ended up never working. Our challenge to you is to invest the time that it takes to learn how relationships work. To learn how the transformation and repair needs to take place in you, because it is possible. We can change, we can grow, we can heal, we can learn to be more secure people, secure with each other. And a securely connected relationship means it's okay to be right or wrong. It's okay to have needs. It's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to say, I'm sorry. It's okay to take ownership for the stuff that you need to make the relationship work and not have to be perfect, or to have the relationship or the partner perform the way they should, or have expectations on yourself to perform above and beyond in every way, or never to be seen as weak or vulnerable. It's okay to be real, to be authentic. And then I'm going to encourage you to explore your own beliefs, explore your feelings and your needs and the emotions that are controlling you, the things that keep you stuck in these unproductive patterns, so that you can have a couple of things. One, so that you will have more to give. If you begin to unpack this and become healthier in these areas, you will have more to give. And second, so that you can understand and appreciate what drives your partner or the other important people around you, and you'll be able to better connect with those people. This is who I want to connect with in the most intimate way possible. And there was a lot of stuff getting in the way. So until we became willing and open to pursuing and exploring the things that needed to be worked on in us and to repair ourselves and not set out on a mission to repair each other, that's when the transformation took place. And it didn't happen overnight. We're still on that journey, but we've been on this journey for a number of years and we'll continue to be on it. But you have to start somewhere. So make a decision. Thanks.